Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be answering some questions that you guys have kindly sent me through to my YouTube community tab post. I'm going to do my best to answer them. Also give a shout out to everyone that has asked a question already. Anyway, we'll begin. I'm just reading off the screen here. So, first question is from my good friend Zabigniew. Have you noticed that the longer being a carnivore, the lower natural level of body fat the human body keeps? Is only my observation. Thanks. Brilliant question. So he's asking about body fat set point, as in, does it mean that being a carnivore or being on an animal-based way of eating means that you retain or sustain a lower body fat level? I would argue yes. I actually did an experiment myself maybe 2 years ago, so about 3.5 years in at that point into my carnivore diet journey, and I went off macro tracking. I didn't weigh anything. What I found was my weight was actually steady from what I was doing before. So it tells me that, one, you're limiting the food choices, therefore you're preventing the likelihood of hedonic behavior where you sort of, don't eat the flapjack, then you eat the flapjack anyway. Well, if it's not in your diet and it's not there, you don't eat it. It's harder to eat foods that are perhaps off plan. You've obviously got the side of it I obviously consume a very high protein diet, so therefore I meet all my nutrient needs in terms of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, things like that to create, hormones, skin, tissues, all sorts of things, neurotransmitters, you name it. So, yeah, we've got the raw material, the resource, the blueprint. We've been eating this way as a species for hundreds of thousands of years. So, we didn't have an obesity problem a few hundred years ago, I don't think. So, it's only when we sort of added in refined foods, sugars, desserts, sweets, pastries, and things like that, which threw things off a bit. For the most part, those of us who do or eat predominantly an unprocessed food diet will be able to adhere to a diet which is compatible and in line with creating the optimal version of themselves. So you often hear people say, the carnivore diet isn't a weight loss diet. No, for a lot of people it isn't. For a lot of people it's just a health improvement diet, but by default sometimes improving your weight in terms of not being over fat or under fat, if that makes sense, can be actually quite useful. So in my opinion, yeah, I'd say that we definitely retain a much more appropriate, in terms of health status, body fat set point on a carnivorous way of eating. Thanks very much for your question. And I've got a question from Annabelle Redwood. Hi Jonathan, I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much. Got this set up, so that will do. Have you ever fasted? What a very long question. What a very long detailed question with a very short answer. Yes, done probably more fasting than most people have, which is odd because I'm not someone who talks about it much or does it often at all. My longest fast was 2 weeks, no food, and that was when I was about 13, 12 years old or something. I don't know what inspired me to do it, but I just did it just at the hell of it. But, I didn't actually drop any weight on the scales. So this calories in, calories out thing, I didn't look any different, didn't really feel any different. It just felt a bit hungry by the end of it, which is very strange because you'd think that young teen not eating food for 2 weeks, they would lose all this weight. Oh, Jonathan, you're talking shit. That's not how it works. I don't believe you. That's what happened. I don't know. That's how it was. Didn't eat anything, no food. I was just drinking a bit of lemon juice in water, a bit of pinch of salt in there for 2 weeks. I don't know how I got away with it. But yeah, nothing happened. The scale was the same. I believe I weighed 74 kilograms at 13 years old, I think it was. Yeah. Outside of that, I've used intermittent fasting as a tool. I did that before it even became popular. So that was about 15 years ago. I did that for about 6 years. So my typical sort of fasting window, if it were, was, I believe, 11 till 7 p.m. So 11 a.m. till 7 p.m. So that was an 8-hour window. I tried refining it for 6 hours at some point. Didn't really notice any benefit. It made it easier to sort of adhere to what I was eating in terms of my chicken, broccoli and rice diet at the time. I sort of certainly enjoyed having bigger meals, but I don't think it really pushed the lever in terms of any health markers. At that point, I think I was pretty healthy anyway, so it didn't really make a difference. But yeah, I just wanted an easy way of life. And I think for a lot of people, if you default to eating that much because that's your appetite, then yeah, go ahead. The next question is from Imperium9189. Hi Jonathan, first thank you for your amazing content. It really helps understand biology and how the human body works. I talk mostly about biochemistry and quantum physics, but okay. Is it best to be on a pure carnivore diet, red meat and eggs basically? I'm not sure about the question. So a pure carnivore diet is an animal foods only based diet. Cheese would be in that eggs would be in that, red meat would be in that. Now, if you're saying, is it better perhaps to be more refined and have like 2 foods versus more foods? I'd say for the purposes of muscular hypertrophy in terms of bodybuilding, more foods will always be better. I've never met a bodybuilder at all in my life that sustains a 1 or 2 ingredient carnivore diet and is significantly over muscled. They do not exist. Not because it's impossible, but because it's very hard. Now, the goal of everything we do bodybuilding isn't to make things hard. Obviously, there's a journey along the way, and you sort of transition over time. You get better, you refine your tool set. But the thing is, why work harder if you can work smarter? There's no benefit. So if you tolerate dairy, cheese in this example, have it. It's got lots of leucine. It means you amplify the anabolic signaling. How much anabolic signaling we get from dairy versus beef, it's a mixed match sort of idea, really. You don't really know. No one really knows. There are studies which sort of compare beef to eggs to whey to this to that to milk to whatever and sugar to this. But the reality is we don't know. In a human body, we don't know because nothing works in isolation. We're a big biochemical factory. So what I say in that instance is certainly include more foods if you can. It gives you more leeway to increase your food intake as your appetite goes up in response to the stimulus you give it in the gym. So you'll find that there's a bottleneck in terms of bodybuilding, gaining muscle, and that's recovery, which involves sleep and eating and some other stuff as well, probably like hydration, stuff like that. But largely it's sleep and the eating. Now, if you're sat there, you're trying to get down 2 kilos of beef each day, which is quite a lot, and you're struggling to get it down, and therefore you're going to bed later because you're chewing meat all evening, it's a better idea just to eat some eggs with it, a bit more palatable, have some dairy, have some liquid fat, butter added to it on top, some ghee, some tallow. You're giving yourself more options, which makes it easier to adhere to, which also means you're going to be less stressed out, which means you're going to sleep better as well. So in my opinion, a mixed animal foods carnivore diet is the optimal food-based diet for a human being in the context of bodybuilding for hypertrophy outcomes. So that's what I'd probably say. Now, proportions, in terms of like red meat to eggs to fish to dairy, whatever, I'll probably say if you can get about 70% of your diet from red meat alone. So if you're to have, say, 200 grams of protein and 200 grams of fat per day, in this hypothetical example, 3/4 of that, roughly or a bit less, should be red meat in terms of protein and fat. Now, what makes up the last third depends on your genetics, preferences. That's accessible to you as well. So if you live next to a fish market and you're from a region in the world ancestrally where your heritage is all fishermen, that's probably where you're going to get that 30% from, if you ask me. Makes sense, doesn't it? But then again, if your body's a bit different, if you have different health factors limiting you along the way, perhaps high omega-3 intake for the fish isn't necessarily needed, but maybe you've got cognitive issues, maybe you need more choline, in which case something like eggs would be more useful. So you'd have maybe 70% beef, 20% eggs, 10% fish, something like that. There's no hard rules with the last 30%, in my opinion. Now, people might argue that you have a portion that's available for starch, 5-10%. Well, if you actually look at the ancestral people, I wouldn't say ancestral because it's inappropriate, it's incorrect, but the indigenous people that were eating a animal foods-based diet around the world right now, they'll actually spit out fibrous starch matter. They're often using these sort of foods as a form of hydration rather than a form of nourishment. So in my opinion, I don't think that fibrous veggies and berries are that appropriate. I myself can't tolerate berries at all, so I don't eat them. So there's no biological demand for me to consume fruit or anything like that. Now, what else is there to discuss? Cheese, dairy, we've been eating it for, I'd probably estimate, a few thousand years, at least. We know that in, I've to put this one. We know how, for example, the days when Jesus was meant to be roaming the earth. Well, and they had butter. They had to find a way of storing fat. So they'd make butter so it'd store better in different weather situations from the dairy. So it does exist as an animal-based food. in modern times and ancient times, which is pretty cool. Butter's also very good for you if you tolerate it. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Now I've got a question from Kimberly Russell. When should you do unilateral training? That's a good question. I think it depends on, obviously, the situation that you're in, of course. I prefer not to do it because it's quite inefficient. People argue, well, you can focus on the weak point more. If you've got a weak left arm, it's like, yeah, or you could just train arms earlier in your routine. Therefore, bring them both up at the same time, rather than isolate to one, then limit yourself in the second one. Now, if you're, say you're trying your hardest, you aim to get 8 steady controlled repetitions with your left bicep for a bicep curl. Now, then you're going to do it for your right arm. Say your left arm takes 80 seconds. Now your right arm takes, 90 seconds. Well, you've not kept up one up with the other. You've not set the benchmark of your strong arm. So it would kind of make more sense to use your strong arm first. So that'll be 90 seconds rather than your weaker arm. So therefore, my strong arm hits 90. That's the benchmark. That's the standard. That's what I can reach with my arms. Therefore, your left arm, when you usually just give up after 80 seconds, because that's the benchmark initially, you might try that a little bit harder to get that last 10 seconds worth of time extension in. So I'd say that's when it's probably useful to have that order in terms of like the weaker to stronger side. Other sort of situations might be if someone's injured or if someone just has one arm or one leg. Definitely a good idea to do unilateral training then.
Introducing Beef Up Carnivore Bodybuilding Bible. The ultimate guide for men and women to lose fat and build muscle. And the best part, Carnivore. It's only $12. Don't miss out on the most detailed resource available. Get your copy now at compositionconsultant.com.
Don't try and do both if you've got a stump on one knee. Don't work. Unilateral training as well. Trying to get all the nuance out here, you can tell. I think there's a time and a place as well where someone might be injured. So they might have an issue with, for example, I've got scars across this arm and around here somewhere. So I couldn't train my left arm for the best part of 3 months in 2025 this year. Still had the best biceps and shoulders on stage. Go figure. So yeah, I'd probably say in that instance, yeah, you probably could sort of keep up some symmetry by training still the right arm. So that's what the science kind of says, is that if you still train the arm that is physically capable, the opposing arm will also benefit from it as well. So you won't lose as much muscle mass. There seems to be some sort of neuromuscular crossover in terms of training one arm versus not training the other arm and maintaining what's built up already. So there's some instances when I would use unilateral training. It can be tiring in some instances to sort of do both at the same time, especially if it means you have to brace harder. So for example, if you're sat on a bicep curl machine, and say it takes all my strength just to sit in the seat and sort of hold myself down sort of thing, just have to use I'm strong, I have to use a heavy weight. Maybe one arm at a time might be safer for me. It might mean that I'm using less accidental inertia in my lower back and spine and hips and things. So I can isolate better using it that way. But for the largest part, I think most people should train both sides at the same time. There's also instances where you can actually use an apparatus where it's got 2 different levers or 2 different foot things or pedals, so you can also do, I know some people, they'll do calf raises with one leg, but then just have the other leg holding the side. Therefore, they've still got that sort of tension going through the weaker leg that's, doing the isolated movement, but they've still got the stability, the safety element. So you could try that as well. So there's just a few ideas. Anyway, hopefully that gives you a bit of information, a bit of useful tact to use in the gym. Now I've got another question from Kimberly, which is, on this way of eating, should you do bulking and cutting? I'm not a fan of those terms just because They're colloquialisms which have been used inappropriately by people or misunderstood and taken way out of context. A bodybuilder will have an off-season and an on-season. An off-season phase is usually used for the vast majority of time to make improvements for the on-season, the contest phase. So what you might say is you'll have more of a muscle gaining phase and a fat loss phase. But that's not to say you can't do a crossover of each. And most people will end up doing some crossover of each during both phases. So for example, if you're redlining your food intake, you're recovering well, you're training hard, then all of a sudden you're like, I'm gassed out, I can't get any more food in, I'm struggling to make gains, you have an infection, you become ill, something happens over Christmas, you caught a bug of some sort, then yeah, it might be sensible to use that time as a bit of a detox, reduce food intake by maybe 20%, do that for a week or two until your appetite comes back, then get back on it. You also start back a bit leaner. It's also very hard to actually lose muscle, so you won't lose muscle during that time anyway. It takes about 3 weeks of being completely detrained to lose muscle that you've built, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. And if you do happen to take a bit of a deload or a rest break or whatever from training, even just doing about 40% of the actual volume that you're doing before, will in most cases, for a good period of time, maintain the majority of the muscle tissue that I put on when you've been training at full capacity. So I wouldn't worry too much about, bulking or cutting. For most people that I work with, it tends to be a case of getting to a healthy set point in terms of like a default body fat level. We feel good, you're training well. Just make steady incremental improvements of a few 100 grams per month in terms of gain of lean muscle tissue. And that's the best way to do it, in my opinion, without sacrificing health, recovery, sleep, or trying to redline food so much that you impair your digestion and therefore can't sleep properly and all this sort of stuff. It's all about just tricking the body and teetering it along the way to get a benefit. The days of gaining 30, 40 pounds or 20 kilos in 6 months are gone. So that's why when I'm taking a lot of client intake forms and they say, Jonathan, we've got 3 months working together, I want to gain 4 kilos of muscle. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I'd love to say it would be. Professional bodybuilders don't do that with all the gear in the world. So what's the chance that you're going to do it? Even with newbie gains, if you're an absolute noob, it's probably very unlikely. Some people do manage that, but it's not something which just happens. It takes a lot of due diligence, excellent genetics, and things which just are outside most of our control. We're not all robotic humans and crazy autistic people like I am. I just happen to do stuff and try to get a good result. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. So there's no such thing in regards to bulking and cutting in bodybuilding, at least not in my opinion. It's best just to sort of keep lean to a sensible point where sleep isn't impaired, things like that. But you can still get some food in, still train, recover, and just get stronger over time. That's the sort of angle I'd take anyway. So now we've got another few questions from Custody Boy 6951. They've been very greedy indeed. They've sent at least 3, but they are 3 pretty good ones. So I'm going to answer them but one by one. So on the first question, how can you debunk the idea that failure has a bad stimulus to fatigue ratio? Myself, anecdotal evidence. Mike Mensa. It's about getting the job done. People look at training as if, oh, you've had this many training frequencies per session, per week, per month for your chest. Therefore, you've limited your growth because you've not done enough frequency. It's like, did it do the job? Did you develop or not? That's the real question. People don't look at the right metric, the right marker. They look at these artifact sort of fixtures that people have set online to say, oh, you've not trained a body part twice per week, therefore you've not maximised your gains, you've neglected your potential. So bollocks. On stage, I've usually got the biggest calves on stage. My lower body, my legs. When I train them once a week, I probably don't even need to do that. It's just genetics. Some people have it, some people don't. Whereas I've got a weaker back in terms of my injuries, so I have to try a bit harder now to sort of develop that. So it might mean that I have to leverage volume rather than intensity, simply because in order to get the intensity needed in one set, to maximize the stimulus, I'd end up sacrificing volume all over because my damage, my injury, would actually be proliferated, made worse. So I'm better off, in a sense, almost doing a bit more volume, but not quite as intense, just to sort of highlight or benchmark that safety element that I really do need when I train. So that's the first question. What are your favourite exercises for each muscle group? Favourite. So this is my favourite based on what I like to do for me and my body and my situation, my circumstances right now. So chest would be an incline hammer strength plate loaded chest of some sort, chest press. That's what I like. Shoulders would be, I quite like a cable upright row, but with like handles or attachments which you can kind of like pull apart. I quite like those. Then you got, I don't know, upper back, I guess, mid upper back. I'd probably say chest supported row, something which you can really pinch your shoulder blades back. Then you've got a lat movement. I quite like assisted chin-ups at the moment, with like a neutral or slightly underhand grip. I use lifting straps for the most part just to sort of keep my stimulus on my lats rather than my biceps if I can. So obviously a strong point. Then we've got, let me think, I'm probably missing a few here. Abs, decline ab crunch, not too high, not too low. No added weight, just control. Steady breathing, holding a vacuum while I can. That's pretty much it, and that's all I can do. So there we go. Then other than that, we've got quads. Quads, I quite like a horizontal leg press of some sort. Something which gets me good depth, but also protects my back somewhat, so I'm not sort of bending forward or creating too much axial fatigue, which is not what I want. Hamstrings, I like a single-legged hamstring curl at the moment. It's like a seated one or a standing one, either or. I feel for me that gives me the best sort of bracing, the best mechanical tension, the best safety element that I can possibly implement in my training. The calves, seated calf press using a leg press machine. I just keep going until I can't move it, basically. I like length and partials, just because it's a way of intensifying it without actually having to change weight or do anything different. I quite like that. Glutes, if that counts, it's kind of integrated into my leg press, but I'd probably say some sort of glute ham raise apparatus, something like that. Biceps, I like a seated bicep curl. So 2 individual handles pulleys, just go like that. Triceps, my weakest body part probably, or one of. I'm going to say a single arm D-handle cable push down. So just like that. So you sort of lean over the body, keep the elbow nice and taut close to the body, and just push it down. That's been the best way I found to do it personally, but you know, it's very individual when you got sort of dodgy elbows and things like that. It's quite individual. You know, you can't sort of say hard and fast rules for things. Yeah, those exercises will build muscle in me. So they'll probably build muscle on you as well. Now, how do you do the carnivore diet for bodybuilding prep versus maintenance versus growth? There's no maintenance in bodybuilding ever. The closest thing you might be able to say is a health phase where you're trying to maintain muscle mass, regain any health you might have lost in terms of like contest prep, hormones dropping, things like that, metabolism reducing slightly, things like that. But I'll go over sort of the prep versus the growth phase. So carnivore diet is the same foods. You just might find that you gravitate towards certain things for convenience in the off season versus on season. You may find that you're more structured in the on season, so therefore your meal timings, your food might be a bit more precise, just because you've not got that leeway. Once you're hungry, you're hungry. Whereas in the off season, you can kind of get away with like an extra hour here or there after meals. It's not going to break the bank, but your best bet is always to follow your satiety signals, your hunger signals, and do what your body tells you. If your breakfast is meant to be at 9, but you're hungry at 9:30, and you can, and it works within your schedule, eat at 9:30. That's your best bet. There's not a better way to do it, because that's when your body's telling you to do it. Now comes the instance where I mentioned earlier about different things and does a bodybuilding redlining food. If you're not hungry because you've done weeks and weeks and weeks of eating at 9, now you're hungry at 9:30, and say you're doing 3 meals a day, so 9:30, I don't know, 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock at night. Now say that first meal is at 9:30, then your next meal, 2:30, 3:30, it's getting back a bit later. Last meal, 7:30, 8:30, but you need 3 hours gap before bed to sleep. You've not maximized your recovery because you've prevented or mitigated yourself from sleeping properly at night. So that's where a good coach comes in to sort of direct you in terms of like food choices, food preparation, food frequency, meal frequency, food selection, how to improve recovery, how to improve your appetite, all things which you should be micromanaging week by week, day by day, so you don't get into these bottlenecks. That's where a good coach comes in. So just to highlight, I do offer consultations, diet plans, training plans, coaching programs, all much more affordable than anyone else you'll find online, and to a high degree of service, much better service. It's abysmal out there, guys, absolutely fucking abysmal. I've seen some really dodgy programs from carnivore coaches out there. Really embarrassing. Like someone actually wrote that for someone else and they charged them money and they paid it. It's shocking. Anyway, that's all the questions for today, guys. Hopefully that's been useful. I might do these more again in the future. But yeah, these are some good questions. Thanks very much. And hopefully I've given you guys some valuable insights. And it's not so much about trying to be perfect all the time. It's all about navigating life and going forward step by step in a way that works with you rather than against you. And the best bodybuilders are always the ones which are low stress, chilled out people, wearing a hoodie on the sofa, playing Xbox 360 and fucking Halo, building muscle, losing fat, going to bed on time, chilling out with friends, eating the right amount of foods and the right foods themselves. That seems to be it. So I know a lot of neurotic people will watch this and they think, yeah, but I've been perfect and I've done all this and it's not working. Relax, calm down. It takes a long time. Like I said earlier about gaining muscle, you're not going to gain muscle like 20 kilos in a year. It's not going to happen. Have respectable, reasonable goals that you can achieve that abide by the literature we do have. And bodybuilding's been going on for, 100 years now. We know how much muscle we can build. We know how much is possible to accrue over different periods of time. We know that there are genetic outliers in terms of responders and non-responders. Chances are, if you've been doing 6 months, 12 months, 3-4 years, you're probably able to work out which one you are. And I find a lot of people just try to achieve goals which are clearly out of bounds, out of hand. It's not their fault. You know, we see the media, we see what's going on online, all these massive blokes, and it's like, yeah, they did it in 4 years. But do you know what it took to get there? Probably not. You probably don't want to know either, and it's a big deal. Bodybuilding is a 24/7 sport, and it's not something you're just going to achieve willy-nilly. It's not something you just go on stage after a year and think, oh yeah, I've won, I look great. It's something which involves a lot of due diligence, care, timing, planning, management. The trick is making that all seem and feel easy while still enjoying life. So hopefully that gives you guys some good ideas. Please get in contact with me through carnivore-muscle.com for any sort of coaching inquiries, things like that. Book a consultation, be able to sort of go through your plan with you, just like having this, answer your questions, give you guys a lot of value as well, hopefully. Yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. Cheers.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.